All right, folks, we have completed all the functions, buttons, and menus of the camera, and this is the wrap-up section about some other things to think about when you're actually going out in the field to get shots. So before you head out, make sure you got things set up correctly. You got the battery charged, you got your memory cards formatted so they got fresh, empty cards so you're ready to put as many images on them as possible. Check that image type and size. This is where you got the raw JPEG setting. This is crucial that you have it right when you're out shooting. And then maybe go through the rest of the menu or parts of the menu that you've been to just to make sure that everything else in the camera is set up the way that you want it to. Now, if you're going to shoot a big event, you're going to take a big vacation, shoot something really important with it, you probably want to shoot some test photos of a blank white surface, table, wall, piece of paper, something like that, and make sure that you do not have dust on the sensor. If there is dust on the sensor, well, we talked about cleaning before. Go through that because it's a lot easier to do with at home in a stable environment than it is out in the field. Once you have that all set up, I think you're ready to get going. Now, the key settings that you're going to be working with on this camera are in very easy to access buttons and dials on this camera. A lot of them have to deal with exposure and focus, drive settings, and a few other things as well. But they are very easy to get to. They can be reprogrammed, so be aware if you have reprogrammed these buttons and you really want to get this camera smooth and easy to work with when you're out in the field because you want to be able to make changes easy and quick. Now, the basic settings on this camera, as I say, a lot of exposure, focus settings, and a few other ones in there as well. So I think these are the really key settings that we're going to be working with. And let's talk about how I might recommend setting the camera up for different types of photography. Now, it really doesn't make sense on this camera for super simple photography, but I do it with all the cameras, so we'll go through it as well. And so if you wanted to set this camera up in the simplest possible mode, either for you or maybe for somebody else who doesn't know how to work this camera, the program mode is going to be the simplest mode. That's where the camera sets shutter speeds and apertures, and it tries to avoid slow shutter speeds where people might have handhold blur induced with too slow of shutter speeds. Auto ISO will keep you at reasonable shutter speeds and modest apertures. It may bump up under low light conditions, but it probably needs to in that case. Exposure compensation should be set at 0 unless you specifically need it otherwise. Auto white balance will work really well in most all situations. Adjust as necessary as always. AF operation, this is where the camera is focusing on subjects and it sets it up for focusing on one shot and then locking in on that particular subject. So that's going to be good for general situations. As far as the focus area, you could use the whole area autofocus, where the camera generally focuses on either what it thinks is a primary subject or what is on closest to the frame. Now, the other option is to use subject tracking. This is given with a bit of a caveat of that may not work depending on your situation. It depends on what type of subjects that whoever's using the camera might be pointed at. That may or may not work, and that's why I'm giving you two recommendations in the focus area option. When it comes to drive, single shot is fine unless you are doing a particular different type of photography. All right, for doing landscape photography, kind of more still life images here, I would think about setting manual exposure. That way you have consistent results from shot to shot. You have very precise control over the exposure. I would probably first set an ISO of 100 because that's where you're going to get the best detailed information off this sensor. You're going to have the least amount of noise and the greatest amount of dynamic range. In a landscape situation, you often want to have a fair bit of depth of field, and this is where you're going to be setting apertures of f8, f11, 16, something in that range. Shutter speeds won't matter if your subject is not moving around, your camera's on a tripod, which it should be. You might end up with a slower shutter speed like a 30th of a second, which is perfectly fine if everything is in a stable position. You don't use exposure compensation here because it's in a manual mode. White balance, we're going to leave it on auto unless we need to change it. Our subject's not moving around, so it's in the one-shot mode. And we want to be pretty precise about how we place focusing, so the 1-point AF makes sense here. And as far as the drive mode, we've got a couple of options. One, we can have single shot where we're maybe using a cable release to trigger the shot, or we're using a 2-second self timer That way we can press the button, let the vibration settle out, and the camera is steady for its final shot. So that would work pretty well in any sort of still life landscape scenario. Next up, let's do a little bit of portrait photography. And here with people, we're going to have some different options, notably with the shutter speed. Once again, I do like manual exposure. Consistent results are really nice to have. In this case, my first setting would probably be with the shutter speed. I would set a shutter speed of 1/25th or higher. That's because you want to make sure that you do not have your subject blurred in the photograph. Depends on how much they're moving around, a little bit with what lens you're using as well. Portrait photographs are often very good with a shallow depth of field. That way you can separate your subject from the background. And so 1.4 to 2.8, whatever wide open setting you have on your lens, is probably a pretty good place to start with. Of course, we want our ISO as low as possible, but this is something we'll budge on if necessary. So if we need to bump it up, feel free to bump it up if you need to under low light conditions. White balance in auto, adjust as necessary. If our subjects aren't moving around too much, the one-shot mode works well. With the focusing area, I might choose one spot exactly where I want it with that particular subject. I also could see using the servo mode and using subject tracking, especially for a subject that might be moving around a little bit. So both of these are good autofocus options, just depending on the type of subject that you're actually shooting. And as far as the drive mode, single shot is going to be fine. There might be situations where you do want to use the continuous shooting if you do want to get a burst of images. All right, now where this camera is really in its forte is action photography. All right, so in this case, we're going to be making a lot of changes on the camera. Once again, I do like manual if you want to keep consistent exposures with consistent lighting. Now, if the light's changing, that's a good reason for going to aperture priority or one of the other modes on the camera. Shutter speeds, well, it's going to depend on how fast your subjects are moving, but you're going to probably want 1/500th of a second or faster for fast moving subjects. This is where apertures of f2.8 and faster are really handy. Sometimes you don't have a lens that goes down to 2.8. If not, you probably want to set it to the most wide open setting. If it goes wider than 2.8, sometimes that gets to be too shallow of a depth of field. So it depends on the lens and the situation that you're shooting, but 2.8 is a great sports aperture. ISO, of course, we would prefer to be at ISO 100, but usually with that faster shutter speed set, we're going to need to bump up the ISO. So an ISO of 400 is a good starting point. If you're shooting indoors, it's going to be much higher, like 6400. White balance at auto, adjust as necessary. AF operation, one of the most important setting changes here. Servo, this is where it's tracking subjects moving towards you and away from you. And so that's generally the first setting change I make when I go to shoot action photography. Focus area, oh boy, do we have a lot of options here. My first favorite is zone 1, which is a customizable zone that I would customize according to the event I was shooting and where I was shooting. This is a great ability of this camera to be able to change that size. So if you're a little bit closer, you can have a little bit bigger point so that you can choose a target area about the torso size of your subject if you're shooting humans, or whatever size of the subject you happen to be shooting. But of course, the other great option, and probably my first choice for most situations, would be subject tracking. It is so incredibly good at sticking to that subject. Oh man, it makes sports photography, it's like cheating. It is so far beyond what I started off when I was in college shooting sports. What this camera can do with subject tracking is unbelievable. And in the drive mode, I wouldn't necessarily go to the highest speed continuous shooting because there are a few caveats of when that's going to be used. Yes, 30 frames per second would be nice to use in some special situations, and I'll be more than happy to jump it up to that high speed continuous when and where necessary. But I think it's actually too fast for a lot of people and a lot of situations. So I think this is a good starting point for action photography. You, of course, are going to make your own adjustments from here, depending on the sport you're shooting, the lens you're using, your access, how close you are, and a number of other features. But I think this is a good place to get you started. All right, one final setup here, and this is general photography. If you were to leave the camera in the camera bag and you want to be ready for just about anything, this is how a good setup might look. All right, aperture value. This way you can kind of just pull the camera out and shoot right away, and you know you're going to get a reasonable exposure. Aperture value allows you to change very quickly from one aperture to the next, which can really give you the full range of photography. Setting it to the middle, f5.6, well, that's kind of not really here nor there. It's kind of right in the middle of everything, and you can adjust as you need from there. Make sure to keep an eye on your shutter speeds, that they are appropriate for your hand holding of the camera as well as your subjects. ISO, I like to leave it at 100. This way, I know that if I need it brighter, I will adjust it for that case, and then I know that I recently changed it, so I can change it back down to ISO 100. And so you could set it a little higher if you want to, if you find those results acceptable to you. Exposure compensation, set at 0, adjust as necessary, make sure that this is not bumped. This can be a major problem when you're in some of these semi-automatic modes. White balance at auto. AF operation, as long as your subjects aren't moving around, the one shot works pretty well. 1-point AF allows you to be pretty discriminating exactly on what you focus on. But another good option is subject tracking. And once again, this depends on the type of subjects that you work with. Sometimes the camera is a little bit better at picking those subjects up than other times. And so it depends on what you find for your type of shooting works best. And then finally, the single shot mode, so that you get one single shot each time you press down the shutter release. And that way, the camera is, I think, set up for good general photography, nothing in particular. Alrighty, folks, there you go. You've made it to the end of the class, and I'm going to congratulate you. You're now an expert on this camera because you know as much as I do. This is a great camera. I think it's going to give a lot of you many years of great use. It's going to provide you with some fantastic opportunities at capturing great images. And I encourage you to really dive in, get this camera customized, and get it tweaked out the way you like it so that you get the absolute best performance with it. Wish you the best of luck out there shooting with it, and hope to see you again in another class.